lake districts can, again, collect money through taxes, special assessments. They can also operate water safety patrols. And in addition to all of those other activities that are listed under associations, they can actually also enact voting regulations if they've been given that authority. Generally, especially when you're talking about smaller lakes that maybe are within a single township, that township actually has authority over some of the voting regulations that may occur in that lake. So for example, speed limits, no wait times, things like that. A local government that has that authority can actually delegate it to a lake district, and the lake district can take that regulatory authority. Lake districts are also eligible for those state lake grants. So again, I think there are a number of lake districts, or excuse me, not lake districts, but I think there are a number of sanitary districts around Lake Winnebago. So now we've got an existing organization that again is another specialized unit of government, but they're generally focused on kind of the sewer water type of activities, making sure that sewer's in place, water's there, septic system regulations, things like that. But they could, under certain circumstances, operate or exercise some lake district powers. I don't know, and I don't think that the current lake districts that we have, or excuse me, the current sanitary districts that we have would be able to take over a large kind of lake management type of activity. And I think this has to do with some of the regulations and how they're written. It would make it very difficult on Lake Winnebago. But they are also eligible for those state lake grants. So if they wanted to be kind of a grant sponsor and say, yes, we'll write a grant for our members and for a certain project, they could be that sponsor of the grant. Again, a little bit different than a lake district is that they are solely governed by a 3-member board. That 3-member board of commissioners are the ones that are making decisions for that sanitary district. And for sanitary district, non-resident property owners don't have the ability to vote. So a little bit of a difference between sanitary districts and lake districts, but the regulations allow flexibility so that if you don't have lake districts, in some cases, sanitary districts can assume some of those management type of activities. Third thing I'll talk about, and I'll talk about it very briefly, and I should mention that, well, I don't know how many sanitary districts are in the state, but we've got maybe 200 lake districts. So it's a little bit more of a process to get them set up because it's a unit of government. It takes some petitioning that happens. There's a number of steps that have to go through to get to become a lake district. Much easier for an association. So we've got 200 districts. Some lakes we have districts and associations on. They both operate in a single lake. The third option I'll bring up and talk about, and we have very, very few examples of commissions in the state of Wisconsin that would operate on a scale like maybe we're talking about. But these are fairly complex. Essentially what happens is a number of units of government that may have some authority on a water body will come together and say, you know what, we all have different regulations. Let's see if we can kind of pool our resources. Let's create a separate commission that will take some of those responsibilities on and become kind of a management type of organization for us. These could be set up legislatively. The Dane County, it's called the Dane County Lakes and Watershed Commission. It's a legislatively set up commission, so in the statutes, there's language in there that sets up this commission. The beauty of doing it legislatively is you can kind of create whatever you want. You can designate how representation is done. So who gets what representation on the commission and how that's decided. I actually believe, I think some of these commissions have a specific funding line through legislative process. So it's something that's an interesting, it's an interesting concept that I think just because we don't have in the state or don't have very many of the state, it's not something we should just simply say, well, no, it's not going to work here. It's something that could be a very good example of how things could happen on the Lake Winnebago system. But again, you have representation from all of those units of government, and that commission can assume a number of responsibilities, a lot of those same responsibilities that we've talked about with associations and commissions. So some things that kind of just to consider to tie this all together, regulatory authority. Really, none of these are going to have a lot of regulatory authority. In fact, associations aren't going to have any regulatory authority. Lake districts, sanitary districts could have that very small piece of regulatory authority for boating regulations. And again, only if that authority is given to them by the local units of government. So not much regulatory authority. Geographic scope. Generally, lake associations don't have a big, kind of defined area that they're going to pull membership from. But generally, you're not going to see people joining a lake association if they live 10, 15 miles from a lake. It's pretty much going to be the people living on the lake or very close to a lake that are going to join an association. Districts, lake districts, sanitary districts, and commissions, they have very, very specifically defined boundaries. I mean, they have to have hard boundaries as to here's our district, that's not our district, this isn't our district. So they have very specific boundaries because, again, they're operating as a local unit of government. So those boundaries need to be set. Financial fairness. You think about it, associations, again, they're voluntary. You can pay for a membership or pay your dues. You don't have to. All of the work and things that association does, generally if they're doing things for the good of the lake and for their members, those benefits are going to be realized even by those that aren't members. So just because my neighbor pays into an association and I don't, and they're going to do something to improve the lake, I'm going to benefit from that as well. So there's a little bit of perhaps unfairness in that where not everyone is contributing to what the association is doing. Districts, they kind of get around that unfairness issue because they're going to tax or assess people, kind of across the board within that district. That's their ability, is that they can, whether you want to be part of the district or not, if you're in those boundaries, you're in that district. Public accountability, again, because associations are very voluntary and not nearly as kind of strict, the accountability is fairly low. I mean, they're accountable to their members. Districts and commissions are going to be very much more accountable because they're much more stringent, much more difficult to set up. In fact, lake districts, to set up a lake district for a lake, you actually need to get 51% of the property owners or 51% of the land base, the owners of 51% of the land in your defined district to say, yes, we want to form a district, to be able to form a district. And so it's much more difficult to set up. We don't have, again, nearly as many of those as we do the associations, but they all have very, very good functions. So why am I talking about this when we're talking about plants? Well, again, this is plants are an issue that I think you probably learned tonight that it's not an easy issue to deal with. And Jay and Chuck talked about some kind of short-term things that you can do, but longer term, it's a little bit more murky. And when you have organizations in place that can work together, taking people working together, it's a much easier process to get things done. Think about the size of Lake Winnebago. It's the largest lake that we have in the state. It's one of the largest lakes that we have in the entire country. And we don't have a really good structure in place to deal with things on a large scale. There have been a number of attempts over the years to set up kind of a large lake-wide organization. Most have failed. There's still one that's going along right now, and in fact, it's a lake association. It's a qualified lake association called the Winnebago Lakes Council. How many of you have ever heard of the Winnebago Lakes Council? Actually, very good. I'm seeing a good number of people. Wayne, you're doing a great job. One of the Lakes Council people is right here tonight. Wayne, he can give you more information, but essentially, like I said, it's a qualified lake organization, so they have gone after grants, received grants. They've done a lot of education with their grant dollars, and so but I think they would attest that it's extremely challenging to try to get people engaged from one end of the lake to the other, because it's difficult when you're talking about a lake that's 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. But that's not to say we shouldn't continue to try that. And there are some other, there are things that we can do, whether it's regional types of organizations, but the opportunity is there, and I'm hoping that what I talked to you about tonight just kind of spurs some thoughts. And what I can do is offer that as a employee of UW Extension, we have, UW Extension has a lakes program in the state. We have a number of staff folks that are housed at UW Stevens Point that are in partnership with the DNR and the Wisconsin Association of Lakes, which is a statewide umbrella lake organization. And they have a lot of expertise in these types of groups that we can tap into and use. A lot of what I talked about tonight you can find in a publication called People of the Lakes, a guide for Wisconsin lake organizations. And if you're interested in seeing this, I have business cards up here that you can grab. I can point you to where you can find this on the internet. I can point you to where you can get a copy of this as well. A lot of great information about these types of organizations. And then the other thing I will bring up quickly is on the back table there is a business card, and it says water quality in the Lake Winnebago pool. This was a report that was done by the DNR about 7 years ago now, 2004. And it kind of gives a really nice overview of kind of general water quality in the Lake Winnebago system. The business cards have a web address where you can get the entire report. If you've got a slow connection or would rather just see a paper copy, I do have a number of copies. I don't have nearly enough copies for everyone, but if you want a copy of that report, you can get it here. If you would like to get a copy of the report paper-wise and they're gone, you've got your half sheet of paper where you can leave comments. Make a note on there that you'd like to see one, and I'll get you one of those copies of that report for you. Again, it's a nice little resource just to kind of give you a snapshot of the Lake Winnebago system and some of the data that Jay talked about early on, and kind of